Hello to everyone in the room, and thanks a lot to the organization team. In this presentation, I will explore how an ethnographic research creation can be at the heart of a critical study on urban space. Through the use of photogrammetry, I have indeed tried to render urban situations of misery I encountered in São Paulo, Brazil, which everyday life stand invisible, into a corporeal and poetic gesture around human dignity. I argue that this method is not simply a technical process. It is an ethnographic process inspired in part by Michel de Certeau, who invites us to look at the city not through its official maps, but through the ephemeral practices of those who inhabit it. In fact, for de Certeau, the city is a battlefield where two logics clash. On one side, you have strategies. These are the productions of power that organize and control space, from urban planning to digital surveillance. On the other side, there are tactics, the ways users act, these workers, in Certeau's words, who subvert the plans by tracing their own paths. My work falls, I think, into this second category. By using a capture technology, photogrammetry, which is although often associated with surveillance, I have developed a research and a creation tactic to reassert the presence of what I believe the city's official strategy tries to hide in São Paulo: the bodies and situations of misery scattered throughout the city. Living periodically in São Paulo between 2022 and 2024, I developed a habit as part of an ethnographic approach of taking photogrammetries during my travels and wanderings within São Paulo urban order. Over the weeks, I digitally collected urban textures: the trash scattered on the ground of an avenue, the decrepit walls next to brand new buildings, as well as the polygraphy of graffiti, which brightens up the idyllic ideal of all globalized and tourist cities. But it's although about the incongruity of an object, an architecture, or a presence. The streets of São Paulo are spaces of transit and wandering, sure. But for a large number of people who are unhoused, they are although living spaces, especially for sleeping and street work. You just have to stand still for a few seconds in the urban flow to see how these individuals are practically an integral part of the built environment. Passerby walk right up to bodies lying on the ground, sometimes even stepping over them. And alongside the unhoused, you will find people collecting papers or cans and all kinds of street vendors. And it wasn't a matter of simply being surprised by urban misery. In some ways, these same street situations are present in my French reality. Instead, it was a sign of an urban arrangement that exacerbates normative, social, cultural, and material tensions. Brazil, after all, is one of the most unequal countries in the world. The richest 1% earns nearly 40 times more than the poorest half of the population. This feeling, far from being a naive look at poverty, is what motivated my use of photogrammetry: to create another type of vision capable of capturing the fractures and superimpositions of reality by reasserting the existence of these bodies. Photogrammetry, therefore, proved to be an innovative tool for reading and transcribing the urban multitude. Somehow, it's a response to an old call from Michel de Certeau, who wrote, "We must awaken the stories that lie sleeping in the streets, and that sometimes lie in a simple name, folded in a thimble, like the silks of fairies." And I did so through a research as creation approach, which according to Carole Brandon, is characterized by being an experiential and heterogeneous methodology where the artwork is the research. Consequently, I place myself at the edge of a contemporary effort to extend human ecology, one that pays close attention to the experiential context composing life worlds. This entails, above all, moving away as much as possible from a moral stance and instead adopting ethnographic methods that deliberately avoid a top-down perspective, privileging, as Jan Jacobs once argued, an observation of the city at human eye level rather than from a bird's eye view. Accordingly, the smartphone, as an everyday life digital tool, allowed me to experiment without attempting, however, to objectively represent the city. My aim was rather to sketch out what we could name here a visual archaeology of the present that borrows from the urban walks and artistic derives of a Gordon Matta Clark in New York, such as his series of walls after the destruction of a building, although of a Francis Alès, such as his series in Mexico of stray dogs and homeless street dwellers, and of Mathieu Pernaut in France, such as his series of migrants in Paris. Following the idea of de Certeau's walker, who writes a space by passing through it, I used a free smartphone app called 3D Live Scanner. It uses a smartphone's camera to create a 3D scan of a space. And then I can use my finger on the screen or import it into a virtual environment to move around the model, rotate it, and even step inside the scene. The speed differential between my quick scan movements and the almost immobility of the bodies on the ground creates a perceptual dissonance that is the core of my approach, to create a contour topography, a reading that manifests as artistic blurriness, superimpositions and distortions, an aesthetic due to the machine's program and although a trace of my own body's movements. It became a visual tactic that escapes voyeurism, because I think it forces the gaze not to focus on a person's identity, but to consider a situation, the situation itself. As viewers, then, we are sent back to a cognitive dimension through the senses and an operative dimension through the image itself. In other words, a certain relationship with others and with ourselves. Indeed, in the image, the street seems to remain attached to the flesh, as if it were impossible for the homeless to get rid of it, but although for the urban flow, that is, the passers-by, to shade their prejudices based on the signs that state the conditions of a life on the street, clothes and odors as corporeal markers of misery. That's why I call these images gisants, recumbent effigies. The word gisant in French literally means that which is stretched out and laying down. This reference to Christianity is relevant for what it still says about our time. As Laurent Testaux writes, capitalism was born in Christendom. And even though Brazil is a secular state, over 80% of its population identifies as Christian, split between Catholicism and Protestantism. Although, as João Batista Borges Pereira explains, in our Western cultures there is a link between biological death and social death, and horizontality is the key element that ties them together. With all these photogrammetries, all these pieces, I used a 3D modeling software to reconstruct, to rebuild a city from the bodies on the ground, a digital poetry of a fictional urban territory viewed through a fisheye. This re-territorialization of a disparate collection within a digital space gives the whole a new significance. A space in ruins, an evanescence of the world of things. Because, according to Bruce Begout, the ruin reveals, I quote, the dissolving flow of time, because He puts us in contact with, I quote again, a kind of eternity of productive and destructive forces and their continual game of opposition. My ethnographic approach then seems to offer itself as an artistic scientific heuristic, where the production of knowledge is linked to the ability to see and make see differently. It's like finding Gordon Clark again, for whom the so-called obscure regions of a city should be cherished. I quote, "One of my concerns here is with the non-humantal, that is, an expression of the commonplace that may counter the grandeur and pomp of architectural structures and their self-glorifying clients." For Tim Ingold, the role of a scholar is not to impose a superior authoritative representation of reality, but to opening things up so that people can see them differently. He writes, "Anthropology must be pushed toward a new epistemology, toward an art of opening things in their midst, not in their closure. Opening is a strong challenge. It presupposes crossing boundaries." Then, this research creation seeks to create not a representation, but a movement, and to participate in a community bound around human dignity. Even if there is still much to discuss here, particularly concerning the production of empathy. For now, it seeks to invite us to question the media and political frameworks that normalize misery, and to consider the distress of the world not as an urban backdrop to be avoided, but as an eruption that should challenge us to change the world. Ultimately, this work is an invitation to you to although become, in de Certeau's words, walkers and tactical readers of the city, to commit to an art of doing research with otherness, un art de faire de la recherche avec l'autre, as Michel de Certeau could have said. Thanks a lot. Merci beaucoup, muchas gracias y muito obrigado.